Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Truth Conversation. We're trying to get this audio right today. We're having a wonderful. I've already had a wonderful chat with Lindsey. Waiting to get started with this interview. I'm very excited to talk about this new book, Building Apologetics. It's only been out about a month or so now, and was privileged to read it. Read most of it in one sitting because it was just so good, and I'm like-minded on so many things. So I think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation, and I hope that you can chime in with some comments and some questions and be part of the conversation as well. And of course, on Facebook Messenger and other platforms, you're able to give me a call at the end of the show and maybe do a call in and join the conversation with us. So without any further ado, let's get to Lindsey. How are we doing today?
So far, so good. It's 12 o'clock. So lunchtime is coming quickly, which makes me happy.
So you like food too? If you can't tell by my physique,
I do.
I love food. I am just
I enjoy food. Yes.
very cool. You'll have to come to Houston sometime, and we will take you on a little food tour. I had the privilege of doing that last night with a couple of friends from a local church or one of our local church partners in Waco. They were in town, and it's just kind of germane to our conversation that this is kind of what we do as missionaries is you connect into areas, through the culture any way that you can, and we're positioned in Chinatown in Houston. So there's a lot of intercultural dialogue that you're able to have, and a lot of bridge building apologetics can go on right in a little coffee shop or restaurant with the local employees and things. So
yeah, I lived in Waco for a few years, and we don't have a Chinatown in Waco. So that would have been definitely exciting to do.
I am so sorry that you had to live in Waco for a few years.
Baylor called Jay's name for a PhD. So he got his PhD at Baylor. I think he graduated a year ago. I guess it's only been a year. It feels like a lot longer. It's only been a year.
Well, I'm just joking because Waco is there's a lot of beautiful places there. And it's my wife just took her mother-in-law to the Magnolia place there, and I worked in the coffee shop while they looked at all the little candle shops and soaps. And
I love that coffee shop too. Not that this is a promo for Magnolia, but the nice thing about that coffee shop is that there are really big tables and there's lamps, and it's really designed for kind of a study atmosphere. Both Chip and Joanna graduated from Baylor, and so it seems like they recognize their proximity to Baylor and the need for a coffee shop with a lot of space. And so I also have put work in at that coffee shop over the years because it's just so well positioned in the community, and it's a greatly designed coffee shop.
Not only big tables, but for people like me and you, the quantity of electrical outlets that are in that coffee shop, that's something I look for. Anyway, we're talking about apologetics, not coffee shops. So, but I think our audience would be surprised at how germane this conversation is to apologetics and what your book is about. And it's really, if I had to summarize it, you didn't really say it this way in the book, but it's almost like how to live your life naturally as an apologist, I would think. It's really just kind of like we so often just force apologetics on people. It's like we come into a conversation with an agenda, and not just apologists, not just Christian apologists do that. I work a lot with Muslims and things, there's a lot of Muslims that do that. There's an agenda to a conversation, whether you're Christian, Muslim, atheist, or anything in between. Sometimes we just don't know how to talk to each other. And that's
True.
what I loved about your book. It was just, it was kind of a book that I've been waiting on to because I do a lot of small groups and things. And it's like this book is great. It's a great introductory apologetics. Like, this is what the life looks like. So what inspired you to write this, Lindsey? Like, what got in your head that made you say, man, we need a book like this?
So full disclosure, this wasn't the book idea that I started with. And we landed here eventually, the publisher and myself, throughout a 6-month conversation about topics that maybe I would write about. The discussion with the publisher started about 5 years ago, and it's progressed along the way. And we ended up with Building Apologetics. My initial idea had to do with world religions and interacting with people from different world religions. And the idea kind of brought forth discussions about what if we expanded that to anyone with whom we disagreed. And that's where the book was born. It's something that I've been passionate about, I think, my whole life. It's I guess. My parents, they're not technically missionaries under the title anymore, but I was a missionary kid. My dad is a pastor, and this idea of being missional minded and talking to people about anything that might also then spark a conversation about our faith eventually. I think also recognizing that sometimes those faith conversations won't happen, and we'll literally just talk about coffee, right? Like, that might be where the conversation goes. But what seeds have you left along the way as a Christ follower that a person might reflect on a conversation about coffee and say, I really enjoyed that conversation I had with so-and-so. Maybe I should talk to them again. And before you know it, you have a friendship.
I've seen that a lot. I tell people all the time, there's a stigma about talking to Muslims, right? That when you mention that in a church, they're like, how do you do that? I had one friend sadly say that he was like, that would terrify me. It's like to that degree, like he's like, that would terrify me to just spend all that time with Muslim people. Mm-hmm. But they're like, how do you get a 4-hour conversation out of Muslims? I was like, oh, that's easy. You just bring up politics.
Yes.
And before you know it, you're talking about global politics, and then you're talking about stuff that Americans have never even heard of, and then you start talking about other things, about the gospel, about differences between differences and likenesses in the Quran and Bible, and it just, I think people are just looking for deep conversations. Somebody even told me with in the podcasting YouTubing world, they're like, the most popular YouTube, you'll notice these popular YouTube channels, they are called long form conversation channels, where you are basically talking for hours. But that's where we are, though. I mean, I think people, especially post COVID, are very hungry for just conversations and interactions. So
I think with the Muslim context in particular, it's this idea of, I think in America, since 9/11, unfortunately, and even before that, really, we've had these misconceptions about Muslims in general, and we sort of painted them with a broad brush. And unfortunately, that's really unfortunate, because I think we're missing out on, like you mentioned, rich conversations that we could be having about so many things. And that makes me sad. It really does. It makes me sad, because it's closing us off to a whole group of people from whom we can learn and be in community with.
Yeah, true. Now, you said in your book on page 48, your intention with this book, and I'll give you the quote, is to enable you to feel confident that you have effective conversations about your faith without being fearful or a jerk. I mean, I love that. What a great thesis statement. So you said there, I mean, obviously there are a lot of people out there that are being fearful when they, when they think of missions or evangelism or something. It's like, oh man,
Uh-huh.
like how do I talk to? I mean, I feel like Christians are so hated right now. I mean, how do I even? So, what would you say to the person who's being fearful, and then what would you? Then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what would you say to the person who feels like they have to be a jerk. You're talking, but so, but
Yeah. I mean, okay, so with the fear, I think sometimes people hesitate to get into conversations with others because they are afraid they might misspeak. They're afraid that they might get something wrong. They're afraid that they might not know answers, and that the conversation is going to go nowhere because maybe they can't give the answer that they want to give on the fly. And so part of my job in this book was to give people a sense of it's okay if you don't have all the answers. And guess what? It's okay if you get something wrong, so long as you're able in humility to go back and say, I misspoke in that conversation. And actually, after doing some research or investigating that further, I discovered that I was incorrect in what I said. And this, that can be really helpful, knowing that you can go back. Sometimes it's a single conversation. Maybe you've met somebody on an airplane and you can't go back. And in that situation, just pray that God maybe puts somebody else in their path who can make the correction for you. But I think in general, when we have relationships and friendships with people, it gets a little bit easier to speak with humility and be able to come back and admit if we got something wrong. It's also okay to say, I don't know. This is where it can be really helpful to study and know people who've written on particular topics, because guess what? You can't be an expert in everything. It's really impossible for someone to hold an expertise in one thing, let alone many things. And so I want people to have the freedom to be able to say, I don't know the answer to that question. It's a really great question. Can I look back and can I look into that and get back to you? And so I hope that those ideas will give people a little bit more confidence to say, okay, I can go into these conversations. Maybe I'm not going to know all the answers. Even if I get something wrong, I can fix it later.
yeah, and as you said, a lot of people. Well, we actually had a comment come in as you were talking. That's something that, and this person in particular that made the comment, I know them personally. They're very they seem very confident in their faith,
Mhm.
But I would be lying if I would say that like every time I step out and do evangelism, I'm just 100% confident, afraid that I'm gonna, I need to be sure that I don't say anything wrong. I found out that's just an impossible standard to live up to when you're having a conversation with somebody, and I don't think people even expect. Well, people do expect that out of people who are apologists and things. I mean, there is the expectation there. But I think we can, the first rule of politics, when I used to work in politics, was lower everybody's expectation. That way, if you do something right, then everybody just is ecstatic. And
Yeah.
so I think going into the conversation, I think it's very crucial that you say, like, you can preface it with, like, look, I'm not an expert in this. I certainly don't have a master's degree or a doctorate in New Testament theology or anything. But from what I've read, this is where I'm at right now. And just saying
Mhm.
that, I think really starts with a rapport that, one, you have some humility. You're claiming you're not an expert. But I think a lot of people feel like they have to be. And I think that's where the jerkiness comes from, if I can make up a word on the spot.
Yeah.
I
It's a
think
great word.
I think I don't know. What's your so what's your thoughts on that, Lindsay? Where do you think the root of people being a jerk when they share their faith? Like, I really feel like that's part of it, though. It's like there's this
Mhm.
need to really pound home, like, I am right, psychologically. But
Yeah.
what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it stems from something positive, this idea of the fact that we have passion for what we believe, and we're passionate about it. And sometimes that passionate comes out in a really positive way, but unfortunately, it also can come out in a negative way. And this is where humility can definitely come in. I think you noted this idea of people having expectations of apologists, maybe knowing the answers to everything. I think if apologists were able to admit that we don't know the answers to everything, and that getting a degree in apologetics doesn't mean that I'm now an expert in all things apologetics. I'm not. And there is still so much for me to learn, and so many areas for me to grow in. And so if I can preface that in the conversation about even just our view of apologists and how we should listen to them through the filter of what areas do they focus on. Because apologetics is a vast field, as you know. I mean, you could, I guess, be an expert in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. You could hold degrees in those things, or you could have studied those for many, many years. But it's a lot to ask of a person to have expertise in both of those fields, as well as philosophy, as well as morality and ethics, and all the things that come under philosophy, right? Because philosophy is just a huge umbrella. And so I think, lowering the expectations for ourselves too, not trying to live up to the standard that has somehow been put on us as people of faith or apologists, that we have to have all the answers right then and there, can help us in those conversations too. As far as being a jerk, there's a few times where I mentioned in the book that we shouldn't be a jerk for Jesus. I think we can all think of a time when we've heard somebody tell us, or maybe even we've experienced ourselves, this idea that somebody from the church or a Christ follower didn't quite hold to the virtues of being a Christian or a Christ follower, right? Those virtues of, the fruit of the Spirit and being being gentle and kind, those kinds of things. I think we can think of those kinds of experiences in our own lives, right? I've certainly have been on the brunt of the other end of people's jerkiness. Is that the word we're going to use? Where they haven't been so kind to me about some of the things that I think or the things that I say. And there's just a way to say things, even if you disagree. There's something called tact that I think Christians and non-Christians can all agree on, that would be a much more beneficial way to approach conversations, rather than to just walk in and say, you're going to hell in a handbasket. That doesn't really help people figure out who Jesus is, or why they need salvation, or even a full picture of what sin is and why we need a savior. So I think there's this idea of tact that has been missing from many conversations involving faith, that I would like to reclaim, and hopefully people will begin to integrate it again into how we deal with other people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on every level of that, because I've seen that. I mean, as a matter of fact, when I do evangelism training for our students at in Ratio Christi every year at HCU, the first thing that comes out of my mouth is like, almost everything you've ever seen on internet apologetics, I want you to forget about that right now. And we're going to start over with a clean slate. And because what we do in Ratio Christi is we are engaging a community on a weekly basis. And, as you point out in your book, we don't always do this perfectly. Not, every apologist is going to mess up. Every pastor is going to mess up from time to time. We're human beings. We mess up. Things happen. But our intention needs to be that we mess up, that messing up is not the standard. It's the exception. It's that we, so when you set up and do a campus evangelism and outreach 5 to 10 hours a week, you're talking to, especially at HCU, there's a campus population of around 4,000, I think. You're talking to the same people every week. And I tell my students the goal is to share the gospel and win souls to Jesus. That's the goal. But if you can't do that in one conversation, the goal ought to be to be able to have the next conversation and the next conversation, or maybe even a cup of coffee, or have them over for dinner, or go out to Chinatown over here and take them to a restaurant or something. And yeah, like that, to me, that seems like a common sense thing in evangelism, but there are people out there that would find that unscriptural almost. Bear in mind, John the Baptist was the greatest man that ever lived according to Jesus, and he stood up and pointed his finger in those Pharisees' faces and let them have it. It's just like, oh man. But now we live in a post-Christian culture. So how do we engage a post-Christian culture? And there's some we'll get into that a little bit later, but I loved your story on page 15 in your book. You're talking about you got in trouble in kindergarten because you told a kid they were going to hell.
I totally did. See, I learned that maybe that's not the best approach.
At 5 years old.
I was very passionate, okay? I was very, very passionate and on fire for Jesus as a 5-year-old, and even especially today. But I think, we don't learn how to interact with people at 5 necessarily, and we find something good, we want to share it with our friends, and we hear that something's going to keep them from something good. We're going to want to tell them, like, you should become a Christian because you don't want to die and live in hell for the rest of eternity. And for me, that was, as a 5-year-old, that was as simple as theology got. As I've gotten older, things have adjusted themselves.
So how have you changed since you were 5 years old, Lindsey? Just kidding.
Well,
no, there's a in that same chapter. There's I think it was in the same chapter. There's a follow up where you actually studied under one of he's a new friend in the last year, Doug Grotas. He's just what a pastoral, wonderful guy. Like, this guy's just, I sing his praises all the time. He's just a good guy. And he had an assignment in his class, which I'm, disclaimer, totally going to rip that off if I'm ever teaching an apologetics class. And it was a great assignment. Go find somebody who is not a Christian and interview them. So, and you said that was kind of a turning point in your life. How was that a turning point in your life?
Yeah, some people would call it your aha moment, I suppose. I was raised in a Christian home, and I, was a Christian from a very young age. I was in my mid-30s when I went to seminary, and this idea of you need to find a non-Christian and have a conversation with them. Okay, I can do that. I have friends who are non-Christians. That should be pretty straightforward. I'll just talk to them and move on with my life after I write the paper. And got into this conversation with my friend, whom I call Priscilla in the book, and realized very quickly that I was sort of in over my head, because we weren't required in this assignment to answer any questions that they might have posed to us, but we were just supposed to take note of how we felt when we were asked certain questions, if we thought we could answer those questions, and come to find out that I felt ill-equipped to respond to some of the questions that she posed. And really, that was a turning point for me, where I realized that apologetics wasn't just for my husband, who had an interest in apologetics because he became a Christian through apologetics, but it was also for me and so many other Christians who had been relying on the faith of their journey over the years, and sort of have fallen into I go to church and I believe because I believe kind of rhythm. Why Christianity is rational and true. Further, I can tell you what the hope is within me and why I am a Christian. Because I had a hard time even answering that question beyond I was raised in a Christian home. That shouldn't be the go-to answer for people. When somebody asks you why you're a Christian, we shouldn't just simply say I was raised in a Christian home. That's what I believe. Well, that's okay, but why do you believe you're a Christian? Not why are your parents Christians? And that kind of solidified it for me in my mind that I had to work really hard in seminary. And so I did. I read so many books that weren't in my syllabi, and I wrote a lot of papers and watched a lot of YouTube and tried to understand William Lane Craig as much as I possibly could, even though he
That
often
can be a
speaks over my
challenge.
head.
That can I've sat three
And
classes underneath Dr. Craig, and it's yeah. I understand what you're saying. Sometimes I feel like I need a dictionary, and I listen to Dr. Craig.
yeah, yeah, lots of conversations with Doug Groteis, lots of conversations with Craig Blomberg, and trying to figure out how to navigate those um, uh, conversations in the future with non-Christians, and what would that look like for me.
Hmm.
That was really the heart of my pursuit in seminary. It wasn't to be in ministry. That just sort of happened.
Yeah, you know, there like I think apologists. The goal ought to be. I think it was maybe Albert Einstein who said, if you can't explain what you know to a 7-year-old, you have to ask the question, do you really know it? And
Hmm.
I think sometimes that is so needed. I was hearing you say like two things. One is the importance of listening, and two, it seems like the importance of taking these big ideas and these things, like you said, you're reading Craig Blomberg and all these major apologists, that are brilliant people. They use philosophical language and things, and I've just never found an occasion, rarely do I find an occasions to drop a name like Kalam cosmological argument in the middle of a natural conversation. But I have used the Kalam cosmological argument probably in the last 2 months in probably 10 conversations. But I never call it that.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
sometimes just learning how to lessen our language and talk to people. I mean, it's really that simple. So I say all that to say this. I hear one of the common criticisms of apologetics being it's like, well, it's just an ivory tower practice. Nobody, it's just useless because who's actually thinking about this stuff? And it's like, well, actually everybody is thinking about this
Mhm.
stuff. It's just sometimes we have because our world is so philosophical, sometimes we just sometimes speak in language that's over people's heads. Um, but that doesn't mean that the language over people's heads is useless either. I don't think you're saying that at
Correct.
all. You know,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I think one of the strategies I learned in law school was when I was, preparing for trials and moot court and mock trial and all of that. My professors would say, think of the jury as at most an eighth grader. And
yeah,
that wasn't to necessarily criticize the jury system or to say anything about jurors, but it was to help us be able to speak what the law was in language that people could understand. And that practice definitely translates when we're talking about theology and eschatology and epistemology and hermeneutics and all of those big words that you learn in seminary, that most people, they have knowledge of what those things are but might not be able to say the word. They might not know the word, they might not recognize the word. And are we able to speak in a context that people can understand, rather than, it almost, it's not name dropping, but it's uh, this almost, it seems almost like you're trying to set yourself up as superior because you have this knowledge. And I don't think that that's what most people are doing when they're using those words. But some people might perceive it that way.
yeah,
And if we could say it in a simpler way, it totally makes sense why in the last several conversations that you've had about the kalam, that the word didn't come up. I mean, gosh,
hmm,
that phrase alone made me really nervous about pursuing a degree in apologetics because I just didn't know, how am I going to ever understand something that's called that. But then when you learn the argument and you're like, oh, okay, there's an easier way without ever having to use the name of it, that we can explain this, even, in children's church, with kids. They can understand the kalam without ever knowing that it's the kalam.
yeah. And I commend William Lane Craig and his team for putting together children's books in the last few years
Yes.
too. Like, it's that's where it really should start. And yeah, I like what you said there. It's not, we may never intend it to be like we're talking over people's heads or exercising our intellect, which it's really hard for me to do given my accent. But that's what I love. That's what I love about having that deep South accent. People just automatically are like, "Oh, listen to this guy. It's so
They
cute." It's like,
label you and they say,
yeah,
bless your heart.
yeah, bless your heart. It's like, yeah, bless my heart. Let's talk about Reformed epistemology just for a moment. And have you looked at the syllogism? It's no, actually, it's total rabbit trail, Lindsay. But that happened to me in a church a couple of years ago. When I stood up, they said they'd introduced me. They talked about my academic work and all this stuff, and then they introduced me. And this sweet little lady comes up after the church. She actually ended up being a supporter of ours too. It's a great story. But she said, when you started speaking, I was like, oh my goodness, listen to this little hillbilly talk. And then you started dropping all of these philosophers' names like Heraclitus and people I'd never heard of. And it was just impressive. And I was just kind of like, thank you, I guess.
Thank you.
Question mark?
It's funny. It's funny, not funny, but the labels that we put on people for the different ways that the assumptions that we make about, even something like an accent is sometimes it's astonishing, right? Like you have an accent. That doesn't tell me anything about your brain. Once you start speaking and I start, understanding your accent and getting past that and realizing that, but we got to get past the labels because we are so quick to label people and we don't even give them a shot sometimes.
Well, and it's true. It comes back to, that's why the importance of listening when it comes to apologetics couldn't be emphasized enough. It happens to me all the time, especially living where we live in Southwest Houston. It is, we live around Chinatown, and we jokingly call it Everything Town because you go one street over and it's all Hindu people, and you go one street over, go one street up from that, it's all Arabic restaurants and bakeries and grocery stores and things. And I've made the mistake of walking up to Middle Eastern people and saying, Assalamu alaikum, and they're like, oh, we're Christians. Oh yeah, I tend to forget sometimes that not everybody from the Middle East are Muslims, and and so yeah, it's really important to listen to people because that's part of why I love the concept of bridge building apologetics, because that's really that was the aha moment for me. It was like, this is not just a way to defend the faith and win a debate. We can actually find these points of connection with people's worldviews and kind of help them feel like that we're on their side on some things, which is admittingly really hard to do sometimes. Just one example of that was the other day we were discussing in a group of Muslims and Christians. We're sitting around in a living room talking about abortion and how to think about abortion. And Muslims have a different view of abortion than we do. They see that they don't feel like the baby, or at least some Muslims don't think that the fetus has a soul, to use like the appropriate verbiage. Fetus doesn't have a soul until 3 months into the pregnancy, and that's when Allah blesses the baby with a soul. Okay. And so, first question I have is: so, is miscarriage then not as large a tragedy for some? And in their mindset, in their cultural milieu, that it is not as big a tragedy. It's what they say, and so the natural follow-up question for me, being an American evangelical Christian, is, well, what about abortion? I'm like, well, that's why we're not so strong on abortion. Now, after 3 months, abortion is murder. Before 3 months, there's some gray area there. And so we're just talking about, I'm like, okay, hold on, let me wrap my head around this. And then my buddies were doing the same thing. We're talking about all this. And I've had this discussion for several years with imams and things, and it always goes the same direction. Well, finally, a very wise Muslim in the room who hardly ever says much. If he does say something, we all listen because he's a pretty wise guy. He just speaks up and he said, "Abortion, my friends, are not the issue. It's not the issue. It's premarital sex is the issue." And if we focus, and we were all like, "Well, yeah," you know.
And we can agree on that.
Yeah, it's like we all agree on that. Adultery is a problem. And he's like, we wouldn't have a problem with abortion if we just get our kids to wait until marriage. And I was like, I felt like such an idiot. I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, I wish I would have thought of that. Like, I can get on board with that. And every Muslim and every Buddhist, Vietnamese Pure Land Buddhist at least, and we have a ton of those in this area. That's part of their 5 ways of living. I think it's number 4 or 5 is the 5-fold path or something they have is something like, do not commit adultery and be faithful to your spouse and save yourself for marriage. It's like, wow, like I can get on board with that,
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, we should be on board with that. That should be a really simple unifier for us. And I think we forget, because culture in some ways tells us to forget the things that unify us. We are so focused on all of the disagreements we have, whether it has to do with religion or politics, or even within the church, different doctrinal issues that we disagree about. That we have forgotten what are the things that bring us together, that unite us. I like to think of it as like sporting events, right? When we get to like the finals of sporting events, and people in football, the Super Bowl, people can have Super Bowl parties together, even if they're cheering for different teams. And oftentimes, they might get, fun jabs here and there against each other, or, make fun of each other in fun, hopefully, when, one team is cheered for and the other is not, or whatever. But they're able to enjoy some nachos and some, soda together. And even if they disagree over who they want to win. And, that's a sort of a silly example, but it can translate to more difficult conversations too, when we're talking about one of the things that I've kind of thought about over the last month when I've been talking about this book is, what if we got together on presidential election nights in the United States, instead of one party having this party here, you get the Republican party actually, and then the Democrat party is celebrating whoever wins and cheering them on all night. We host like a presidential election party in our homes, and some people are cheering for one side and some people are cheering for the other, just like the Super Bowl, and we're watching it and we're having fun and enjoying it, even though we disagree. You don't really hear about those things happening unless you're in law school, which is something we did actually do. But we don't hear about that kind of thing like we would with sports, and I'm just wondering why. Like it sounds like it could be a new thing. Maybe that could take on here in the United States.
Wasn't a party. It was just me and my best friend sitting around on a couch. He was for Hillary. I was for Trump. And I can remember when Trump won, I was sitting there watching that come down the pipe. And, well, let me clarify that. I wasn't for Trump as much as I was for a Republican Party platform. But needless to say, whenever I saw him actually win, we were both just shocked. We're like, he won? What? Like, what happened? Yeah, and it was kind of a moment. It was really, it was really good. So yeah, we have I have a good question that has come on here already.
Yep.
Let's just add it to the broadcast, because let's go ahead. We usually do Q&A at the end, but this is a good conversation piece. So I don't know who, not sure if I know who JCR is, but we will put it on here. He said, what is our goal for finding unity? And then he follows up with, why? Who wins the Super Bowl doesn't matter. The elections and our faith matter. Well, I mean, I think that would depend on who you talk to. Some people, I'm with you, but yeah. So what is?
Some people have made the Super Bowl and sports their idol and their God in many ways,
Yeah.
unfortunately, here
Yeah.
in the United States, especially.
So, what is our goal for finding this unity? You do talk about that in the book. It's not unity for unity's sake by any stretch of the imagination,
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Lindsay. What's the goal of for finding unity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm really glad JCR asked. I don't know what your name is in real life, so I'll just call you Jay. I'm really glad that Jay asked that question. The the point of unity is it really goes along with this second foundation that I've got for bridge building apologetics, which is friendship, and the idea of genuine relationship and how that can open the door to other conversations that are more important than, say, the Super Bowl. So if you have your unbelieving neighbors over for a sporting event, it might just be about the sporting event. That's what you're gonna watch. That's what you're gonna talk about. But it could lead to other conversations about. I mean, for example, the other night we were watching the Stanley Cup Finals in our house, and our neighbor came over for some of it and watched it with us. And we talked about sports, we talked about hockey, but then it led to a conversation eventually because of commercials and whatnot about other issues related to politics and gender and sexuality. And we were able to have those discussions freely in a really, unassuming way. Like we were just talking. And I think that finding unity with the smaller things can allow us to have conversations about bigger things, even if we disagree on those topics. So it's not just unity for unity's sake. You're not just trying to find your unity. I think even in a practical way, unity can be found in our neighborhoods, right? Like with our neighbors, even if they have a political sign that you disagree with, they're still living in your neighborhood. They're still your neighbor, and you can find unity in that. And perhaps as you begin to have more conversations with them and more fruitful relationship with them, you can then have conversations about faith or be able to ask them questions without being afraid. So say, I noticed you've got that political sign in your front yard supporting such and such candidate. Can you tell me more about that? Why do you support that candidate? And allow them to share their perspective. But those kinds of deeper conversations are less likely to happen just on the fly. And we are much more likely to find unity in little things, which then gives us the opportunity then to have a conversation about the bigger things.
Yeah, and I don't know if unity is even the best word. It's more about
It's what
finding.
Faithiest Atheist just said too. Look at Faithiest Atheist's
He
comment.
said, "Oh yeah," he said, "Here we go." And here's an atheist talking about it. Let's see. I'm not sure Lindsay's book preaches for unity, at least not specifically. It's more like how Christians can have close relationships with outsiders as a foundation for future conversations. And yeah, and I would agree with that because it's not about finding unity. It's more about finding common ground, I would think, or it would be um, when looking at religious epistemology, religious truth and knowledge in the different religious books. For example, when we study the Bible with Muslims, we look at admitted truth in the Bible and in the Quran. Like there's certain things the Quran says that definitely the Bible would agree with, like Jesus was born of a virgin and Jesus will come back and judge the living and the dead one day. Jesus performed miracles. He spoke with authority. He was certainly an important figure in history, and I've had great conversations come out of that. I can remember one night we were talking about the law in the Quran and Bible, and we only had time to look at some stuff in the Torah, which is very important, when it comes to discussing law. And I think we were going to go on to like the commands in the New Testament, because there's a lot of people don't realize there's over 1,000 commands in the New Testament if you put them all together, which is, there's only 613 in the Torah.
Yeah.
So it's so I had a great conversation with one of my Muslim friends. They asked me afterwards, they said, how come Jesus never gave commands? I'm like, are you really? You never heard have you read the Sermon on the Mount? They said, no, what's that? And I showed them Matthew chapter 5. And while, we always have a big Hallel feast after that, like the center purchases a big catered meal. That Muslim sat there and read the entire Sermon on the Mount before they went and got dinner, and they were just excited. They were like, wow, I'd never realized it. It's like, yeah, it's a whole 3 chapters of commands and warnings and judgments. And yeah, so you just really never know. One thing I would add to what you were saying there is it shows respect to the other party whenever you think that way. And I think the Apostle Paul really modeled that well in Acts 17, which you brought out in your book. I don't know if you'd want to explain a little bit about what you said there, because we definitely want people to go buy the book and read it, which, by the way, you can find that in the description of the video. There's a link to where you can get on Amazon and get the book. I highly recommend it. It's on Audible, Kindle, and paperback, for those who still read paperback books. So
I mean, I love paperback.
Me
Look
too.
at that. Yeah.
There it is. Well, you can see I still read books. They're not just sitting on my shelf for decoration. But no, so yeah, that's kind of Paul's methodology in Acts 17, and one of the best examples, I think, too, in Jesus's methodology when he talked to Nicodemus in John chapter 3 and the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. He was trying to find common ground and help them understand more deeply the presuppositions they were already bringing into the conversation. So, yeah, would you like to talk to us about Acts 17, how Paul modeled that for us, Lindsey?
Yeah, I mean, Paul is a great example, right? Because in bridge building and in bridge building apologetics, I mentioned 2 foundations that it needs to be built on. The first is truth, and the second is genuine friendship. And in Paul's life, we see his conversion story, which is just a magnificent conversion story. And then he goes away for a while to study and learn and grow in his personal relationship with Jesus. And then he begins his ministry. So it's not an immediate, I became a Christian and now I'm going to go out and preach the gospel. He made sure that he had a firm grasp of truth first. And then we see him in Acts 17. He goes and he engages at the Jewish synagogue first, which he often did. He would stop by the Jewish synagogue and reason from the scriptures there. And then he went out into the square, into the public square, and really began, reasoning from the scriptures with Gentiles. And the way that he approached this idea of being all things to all people, never compromising the truth of Christianity and his faith, rather acknowledging some of the things of the world, saying, okay, you worship this unknown God, for example. Let me tell you about God, real God. And he used it as an opportunity to share the gospel. And, it's not that everybody was saved in that moment. We read that a few people became Christians. And really, it's the point is that he was confident in the way that he shared his faith. And he did so in a way that the people would find relatable. They would understand what he was talking about and how he was approaching it. And I think it's a great way for us to relate to people without compromising our faith. I think that's an important part of my book. Is sometimes people might think that I'm just saying be nice to everybody or maybe affirm everything. And that's not actually at all what I say in this book. This book is about holding firmly to the convictions of biblical Christianity, and yet being friends with people so that you can get the opportunity. And, as in 1 Peter 3:15 says, whenever somebody asks, to give the hope within you. And so that idea of one day you might get the chance to share the hope within you. But what are you going to do with all the other time? How will you be planting seeds along the way with your actions and your words? because those things really matter, especially in today's culture, where unfortunately so many people are not behaving well.
It's true. We live in a very polarizing time, and it's almost like you cannot find any middle ground. You couldn't do what the Apostle Paul did, and he probably was the greatest evangelist in the New Testament apart from Jesus himself. He just really knew how to speak into his culture and modeled that so well for us. And didn't matter where he was, he just knew how to talk to people. And I like how Acts 17 describes Paul as reasoning in the synagogues of people. So in other words, Paul was not one to pick up the proverbial megaphone and start yelling at people. I think that word reasoned, it's been several years since I looked at it now, but I believe it even shows, I think the Greek describes it, even the posture is more a relaxed posture while you do that. And so it's that's such a different way of thinking, I think, than a lot of the way apologetics has been modeled. And as many apologists discuss, like we do, sometimes apologetics does have a PR problem, and I think there's people out there like yourself, Lindsey, that are trying to help people understand that traditionally apologetics, it seems to have a twofold way of working itself out into a culture. One is like building bridges and trying to find common ground, bring people into a conversation. That's my preferred methodology. It's your preferred methodology, it seems like. Then the other one's really, I've come to say anyway, that it's not really apologetics so much as it is polemics. It is just absolutely like, we've got to own the other side. We got to tear them down. We got to put them in their place, and and I don't think that that is necessarily fruitful. And there's one of my students who's listening in said, Alex said here, and social media makes it more polarized in some ways, because when someone isn't talking in person, they can sometimes be harsher, and that's that's absolutely the case. I actually had a lady in my church the other day. I've been teaching an apologetics class about once a month on Wednesday night, and she said, you know what the next class needs to be? How to engage tactfully on social media. I'm like,
Yes.
that you're right. Like Alex was saying there, it is so sad to see some of the interactions on social media, and it's like all apologists get grouped into that. And you see some really dumb stuff on social media, but I've learned, Christian maturity has taught me, by the grace of God, that, I just don't have to reply to everything on social media. And when I do,
the unfollow button is really nice, or the
that's
mute
handy.
button sometimes can be really handy. And also recognizing that, again, with this label, right? We've labeled all apologists in this one category, and I know a lot of apologists, and most of them don't fall into that category.
Yeah.
I will say that there's a time and a place, right? So some apologists love to engage in debate, and that is the way that they have been gifted. They enjoy debating things with non-theists and non-Christians, and that's kind of what God has gifted them with. Other people, that is not where their gifts lie, and some of them are trying to fit themselves, their circle selves through the square peg, and it's not working, and that's where we get sort of those unfortunate situations online where Christians appear to be really provocative for provoking sake. That's the best way to say it, I guess, or not the best way to say it, but they're simply trying to push buttons or get clicks. And I've been noticing more and more that I keep asking myself, like, what's the mission?
Yeah.
And it's not just, Christian apologists now that I'm thinking of, it's Christians in general, any Christian who has a YouTube channel. What is the mission? What is the purpose behind your YouTube channel? Why did you start doing this? And why are you drifting from that? Um, are you drifting for clicks? I anybody can make those assumptions. And I haven't had personal conversations with many people who it seems like they're doing it for clicks, but it's more than a click that is going to win somebody to Christ. We've got to be better than that. We've got to be set apart, and people have to know us by the way that we behave, even online. Just because you're online, you don't get a free pass to say whatever it is you want, anytime you want, to whomever you want. There again needs to be tact, and I think we're missing it. One of the things about having friendships online, and I do have friendships online with people I've never met in real life, and one of the ways to do that well is to ask questions and then listen. But with society and culture wanting rapid fire conversation to happen and dialogue to happen, we don't take the time to process things. We feel this need to respond immediately rather than stepping back and saying, okay, I'm going to process that and let me come back to you tomorrow. Because so often we're just like, oh, they meant it that way, or this is what they intended, when they didn't really intend it that way. But because we assume, based on the language they use, that that's what they meant, we've got a problem.
Yeah, it's reading into a conversation because we tend to affiliate ideas with people, and so if we hear somebody say something similar to something we read on Twitter from somebody we don't like, that we follow just to stay in the presidential candidate or whatever, it's like, oh, we just assume that that's their entire worldview, and really it comes back to that listening problem. Social media can be great for conversation and dialogue. But I've joined some groups that I thought were going to be that, some Muslim Christian dialogue groups, science and faith dialogue groups, and it's just a bunch of thumbnails and clickbait, people fighting and things like that. I just end up leaving those groups. It's just, what's the point? You're rarely going to convince somebody to change the entire way that they think on a Facebook wall, And just one of the practical things that I've done has just been make it a practice. When I start seeing that it's getting inflammatory, I'll just put on there, hey, I'm going to shoot you a private message and we'll talk about it on there. And I've noticed that some people that we would consider like trolls, have quit trolling because of that, because we have an actual conversation in a messenger setting instead of for the whole world to see on a Facebook wall. And it ends with me asking them for prayer requests and things like that, and then they actually see that I'm not what they think I am. It's usually what it is. It's why they're posting that kind of stuff. They think that I'm, some sort of thing, some sort of what would you call it, talking head that's just there to promote an agenda. It's really not. The only agenda I want to promote is the love of Christ and the gospel. That's my whole thing online. So so hopefully that's being communicated. That being said, there'll be people out there that say, well, I follow your Facebook page. Sometimes there's some snarky things that come across there and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, I've got a sarcastic sense of humor. Give me some grace. Like I'll find some kind of stupid Star Trek meme or something and put that up there. And I've had dinner with people and they say, why did you post that? Like, that's so out of character for you after talking. It's like, my sarcasm's got me in trouble for years, actually. So
yeah, one of the things about social media is, we have these profiles, and I don't have a massive following on any of the socials, which is fine with me, actually. But there's a lot of times profiles will have that disclaimer at the top that says likes or follows don't equal endorsements. And the idea behind that is, I might like a post from somebody that I am completely ideologically different than. right? But they have posted something that I agree with or something funny. And I have found that some people will criticize me. In fact, this has actually literally happened to me. I liked a post from a Christian who had shared something a couple of years ago. It had to do with politics, and it was a funny meme about a mom and a daughter, and I liked it. And I was canceled by this lady. Said we can't listen to her anymore because she liked this post from so and so, and it was no good. Um, we got to be careful when we do that because one, it kind of puts us in this echo chamber where we're not hearing about different sides at all, and we're just assuming we're right about everything, which we're not. There are things that we get wrong, and we got to be able to admit that over the course of time. And I'm sure God will tell me when I get to heaven, like, oh, you totally misinterpreted that theologically. And I have to, obviously at that point I'm like, whoa. But we have to be able to, look outside of the Christian sphere, which it can provide safety and protection for us. But we have to be able to look outside that so we can know what the world is learning. What is culture teaching them about truth, and how can we respond well? If we're not paying attention to what's happening out there, if we're not listening to people's perspectives outside of the Christian sphere, we won't even be able to have a conversation with them because we're unaware of the things that are occurring. That doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that you should watch the news 100% of the time. I don't. I don't watch the news. In fact, in my book club last night, somebody asked me a question about something that happened in the news, and I was like, I have no idea how to answer that question because I don't know what happened. And that I'll look into it was my answer. Because I don't think we were ever supposed to get news 24 hours a day about the whole world. It's too much. And I push for the 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock news. If that's what you need, catch the weather, catch the sports update, get the snapshot of what's happening in the world and in locally. But to consume media, the news, 24 hours a day, it's exhausting. And for whose benefit? What are you benefiting from it? And who are you benefiting? Like you're benefiting the media company. They're just making so much money off of you. And for what? What's the purpose? Again, what's the mission? What is our mission as Christ followers? And be able to talk, but you don't have to know everything that's happening around the world 24 hours a day. That's not going to help you. Instead, spend that time studying the Word of God and equip yourself that way, so that when falsehoods come into your world, you can say, "Oh, wait, I can spot that because I know the Word of God." Fill yourself with that rather than the talking heads of the moment.
Yeah, usually my morning routine is my sister a couple of years ago got me for Christmas one of those little Google Nest things or whatever, and it sits in our kitchen. And there's 3 things that I go to, Lindsey, that keep me pretty well informed. If I want to research beyond that, I can. But it's like I heard the other day, there's a massive red wave of conservative politics moving across the European Union. I'm like, what? Oh. And so I went after that and looked into that a little bit and made a post on social media about it, see if people want to interact with it. My routine, and I tell this to my students and everybody I talk to, if you want to stay informed, find a little thing like that. Your phone works too, and just say, okay, Google, play BBC News, and it'll have like a 5-minute news briefing. And I'll usually do BBC, Al Jazeera, Fox News, CNN. And then by the time I'm done making
that's pretty
my
balanced.
And
yeah.
it's like, by the time all that you hear all these different, and in 5 minutes, they don't have a whole lot of time to like push a lot of agenda stuff, but you can still hear the agendas being pushed, especially with Al Jazeera right now on the Palestinian conflict and things. It's just, so it's always the genocide in Gaza, like that's how they start. The genocide in Gaza, which is like, from their perspective, it is, So, but yeah, it's, so yeah, you can, but then you end with CNN talking about talking about the Trump trial. Fox News is talking about the Hunter Biden trial. BBC is talking about, usually it's the BBC that shocks me. They'll report something on every continent pretty much in 5 minutes. And there's a massive war going on in Sudan right now. 25 people being killed in Nigeria by gunmen. And that's the kind of stuff that I have to listen to as a global, like I have to think globally, being assistant director of the global operations for Ratio Christi. So, So yeah, I'm going to be in Nigeria in less than a month. And it's like, oh, where is this city where 25 people were killed? Oh, it's 2 hours above Abuja where I'm going to be. So, noted. So yeah, I really, but like you said, I could watch 24-hour news. It would be very easy for me to get sucked into that. But the news does a really good job when they have the time. It's all about polarization and indoctrination. That's all. I can remember when in 2006, I think it was, I was a history major in my first go at an undergraduate education, and I didn't graduate with a history degree, but I almost did before I became a Christian. And I can remember our humanities department saying that we could not use Fox News or CNN for first-person citations anymore. Like, that's not primary source material. I was like, I can remember that. That was almost 20 years ago. So that's almost been my thoughts on it ever since. It's like you're really just hearing opinions and perspectives. It's not very objective. But if you can find a 5-minute news briefing, I preach that gospel. You shouldn't have said that, because now I went down that rabbit trail. I'm like, I preach that gospel all the time, Lindsey. Please unplug. Okay, so
take a media fast. It's good for you.
Yeah. So we've been talking for over an hour, and I've appreciated the conversation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I hope we can cross paths sometime, and they're doing conferences or something. I'm sure you'll eventually make it to Houston. Every apologist does. So when you do, I hope we can meet Jay too. He seems like his Facebook profile picture, now everybody's going to run to his profile, is hilarious. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to meet this guy. So that said, we're into Q&A and call-in time. If anybody out there would like to call in, ask some questions. I mean, obviously we've covered a ton of ground here. You don't have to ask questions that are even germane to our conversation. We are, after all, apologists. We like to hear questions, and that does not mean that we have all the answers, but it does. A lot of times I get questions asked to me. It's like, yeah, I don't know, but boy, that's interesting. I can't wait to go study that out, and I'll get back with you a little bit later. So yeah, please send in a question via comments on Facebook or YouTube. Feel free to call me on Facebook Messenger. If you're on Facebook right now, you can do that through the Truth Conversation. Or if you're my friend, you can call me on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. Everything's connected to my phone here, and I have this lovely little device that's Bluetooth, and I can bring you right into the broadcast. So it's pretty. This is
technology is wild.
Technology, man. This is the era in which we live, and so feel free. So Lindsey,
or not.
Yeah, or just don't do that. Yeah, or the introverted among us. I think Lindsey said in her book, "You're introverted, right?"
So introverted. Like, it's so funny that I'm having to talk and do all these things. Very, very introverted. I told my husband today, I wish it was just a day where I could sit and read. And he goes, I'm feeling that today too. So some days are better than others as far as how I feel.
Yep. And so, it would mortify my wife to call into a show like this and be broadcasted. So, for all of our extroverts, you're welcome to call in. For all of our introverts, you're welcome to comment. That's pretty much why we do it that way. So, for all of our very introverted people,
there's something. Good luck. Yeah. You're watching.
Just shoot
you're
me a
probably
text.
Eating your lunch.
Just shoot me a text or message or whatever. So, as we're waiting, we may have somebody call in, somebody, or not. What are some of the questions that you've gotten since? So you've been on a lot of podcasts here lately. I've seen you showing up
Yeah.
on my YouTube feed a lot and things. That's pretty cool.
Thanks.
And this book has
Thanks.
actually done very well.
Huh.
Um, so I saw that you were pretty far up on the new releases on the Amazon category. Which category was
Yeah.
that? Um,
So Audible is number 6 right now.
yeah, that's awesome.
But all 3 versions are in the top, I think, 40 on Amazon right now for new releases, um, which is, that's just, yeah. I don't even know what to think about that. That's crazy. I read the Audible book, so that was important to me to do that, even though it was terrifying for me to sit in a studio and read the words that I wrote. There were
Oh
times where
man,
I'd be like, "Why did I write it that way? It doesn't.
yeah,
It
no,
sounds weird."
yeah. Gosh, I go through that too. It's
but
glad to hear I'm not the only
but
person that deals with that.
yeah, no, you're not the only one. But it's sitting in a studio in Minneapolis. My sound engineer Jim at Audio Ruckus was just such a blessing to me. He put me at ease and helped me record the book without feeling like there was a lot of pressure. But yeah, there were times I'd be like, "Why did she write it like that? I want to change this." And he's like, "You wrote it like that, and you can't change it."
Yeah, sorry, it's already published.
Sorry.
So, um, let's see. I'm just checking through my text messages. All right, so we
I see one
have.
from the Faithiest
Yeah,
Atheist.
about to say I was about to throw the. I just call him Faithiest for short. Um,
Yeah, because I
there.
can't say his name because he even though he's a friend.
Yeah, yeah. I can't say his nickname either because I'll get in trouble. So, so he said, how would Lindsay respond to Christians who are worried that she's just saying to be nice?
Well, I would send them to his 5-star review on Amazon because he talks about that very thing.
That's the perfect response. Oh, yeah. Should we post his 5-star review on Amazon? It's like,
Yeah, because that's what I would send people to. I'd be like, "Yeah, you think I'm just telling you to be nice? Look, this atheist. He he saw through it and he knew what I was trying to get at." No, I think the fact that okay, Richard, the fact that the um, first firm foundation of bridge building is truth. I think that's the first thing. That's the thing we have to get right as Christians. Or what are we even doing? Doesn't mean you have to be an expert to be able to share the gospel in 30 seconds. Um, what is the gospel and can you do it? Can you share it? And then we get into friendship. Then there's a whole section on sharing your faith with confidence that has to do with knowing truth and being able to share it with confidence. And you can't confidently share the faith if you don't know it. So equipping yourself in the word is vital. But I think that's where we can go away from this idea of I'm just telling people to be nice. You should be nice. Um, you should be nice. And Jesus was nice. When we see Jesus speak out in anger or in annoyance, sometimes in other ways, it's usually with the Pharisees and the leaders, the religious leaders. It's not with people like the woman at the well or Zacchaeus in the tree, or it's not with the lay people that we generally interact with as humans. It's the religious leaders that he really called out, and so I think we should be nice. That should Jesus calls us to be meek, and we should do that. But there is a time and a place for us to be a little bit more firm in the way that we approach things. There's an internet person who has done various series on theological issues, and this person has had videos against false teachers and has called out false teachers in pretty firm language, and that's important because Christians should be able to say that there are false teachers who are teaching
Yeah.
false theologies that people are falling for. But at the same time, when we're engaging one-on-one with people and we're talking with our neighbors or people at sporting events or concerts, our approach should be gentleness and kindness.
Yeah, it's kind of aligned with a word that I kind of live by. Is like, you can be a lion in the pulpit, but you need to be a lamb everywhere else. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
a there's a time and place for things, and
That's good.
yeah, and I can just remember that was a personal rebuke that came to me in prayer. I really felt like the Holy Spirit laid that one on my heart years ago, probably 10 years ago now, because there was a time after I was a Christian, I got really like I had like this experience with God that really just solidified my faith and things. Like I didn't speak in tongues or anything like that, but I certainly felt like it was like an infilling of the Holy Spirit that just set me
Yeah.
ablaze for about 2 years after I was saved. But I was very uncouth too. Like looking back at it, like there was some maturity issues, and yeah, just because you have this like zeal for God doesn't mean that you have all the wisdom in the world too. so
Right. Right.
so, but yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear you're saying more than just be nice. I mean, there's it's honestly been disarming when people see like I can be pretty firm in a pulpit, and then when somebody meets me around an altar call or something like that, or goes out to lunch with me, they're like, I would never imagine you're. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm not apologizing for the word of God. I'm an apologist. That means I don't apologize for anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Right.
apologizing. Yeah. So yeah, very, very good answer. Here's another one. Let me see here. Um, what are your favorite apologetics books?
Oh, okay. Um,
All of them? No, not really.
no. Uh,
Same.
not all of them. That's
How
yeah,
about let's start
unfortunate.
with
But
what's your least favorite apologetics book? Nobody ever
no,
asked
I'm not.
that.
Lindsay
No,
is
I'm
not
not gonna do
answering that question. Put in mouth. That's it. No. So the book that we recommend the most is generally J. Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity,
Hmm.
which just came out, I think, with its 10th anniversary edition. Um, One of the things that I especially love about that text is there are drawings that Jim has made himself as
Yeah.
he's an artist and has done that, and it's beautifully illustrated and easy to understand and accessible. There are kids versions of that book, so you could actually do a study as a family for that particular text. I lean more toward intellectual kinds of books and academic texts rather than popular texts, even though I literally wrote a popular level book, uh, which has like 20 pages of endnotes. So that's a little unusual as well, that there's just a lot of references that I included
Yeah.
in the book so you can read more. But I tend toward Craig Blomberg books. Doug Groteis has written a number of books that lean philosophical. His books on the New Age are older now, but I think they're completely relevant uh, today and in today's culture with Christians, unfortunately, taking on some New Age ideas. There are a large number of Christians, for example, who believe in reincarnation or karma, or believe that you can pray with crystals, and that the crystals hold some sort of power. So even though the New Age is something that, it's 50 years on, it is still something that is relevant today. But yeah, I think if you're going to start somewhere and you're looking for me, the Gospels are really important as far as like where could you start as an apologist. Defending Jesus is the goal. So
Yeah.
are the Gospels reliable? And so find a book by Craig Blomberg that, he's written a number of books that, although they might seem academic, he writes beautifully. and is completely accessible in the way that he writes. If you're looking for a book on world religion, we've talked a lot about different world religions today. There's a book called Neighboring Faiths by Wynne Cordwin. It's a textbook, so it's a little bit longer. But what I love about Wynne and his heart is that he gives the generalized description of these religions, but then he has sections about what to do if you meet somebody from that religion. What are the things you can talk about? Where can you find common ground? And then how can you discuss your differences in a loving way? So Neighboring Faiths is a great book if you're looking for like a world religion book. If you want a more accessible text that isn't about 1,000 pages long, you could go to a really old book, but it's by Fritz Ridenour. It's called So What's the Difference? And it gives you a really brief primer on some of the top world religions and a lot of extra reading material in the bibliography that you could learn from. So that's kind of where I'd start. I like Mama Bear Apologetics as well. I like Building Apologetics. So you could begin there as well.
Yeah, that's true about your book, Building Apologetics. I actually read it on Kindle. And so, you know how Kindle has like percentage left or something like that at the bottom of the page or something. And then all of a sudden the book ended. I thought I had another chapter to go or something. And the entire last, I don't know, like 15% of the book was all endnotes or something like that. I was on the plane and I had it timed out to where I would finish the book before I landed, and I was like, well, now I have an hour left, so I just found another Kindle book to this is all endnotes. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry that I didn't read all of your endnotes. I just told on myself, but I didn't read through all of your endnotes. But yeah, no, it's there was for a popular level book that is it's like a Nancy Pearcey level endnote section. It's just like a whole other little book. And you mentioned Wynne Cordwin's book. It's actually sitting behind me right there. Yep. If I can point at it. Yeah. That's my world religion section.
Yep.
Yeah, and he we actually used that book in our world religions class here. It was one of our many textbooks when I had Dr. Abear here at HCU. And what I like about that's a great world religions text, and it's almost like a book of books, if you will. It's almost like so if you wanted to know about world religions, it's all, so you just think like you want to read 50 pages on African traditional religion, well, you have a book that has that in there. You know, it's really well done book. Yeah,
he's become a friend of mine over the last year or so, last couple of years or so. We taught an online course together through Renew, a ministry, and he actually endorsed Building Apologetics as well. And I'm still kind of
pinched. This podcast about a month ago, and it was one of those days I got sick and we had to cancel the broadcast. So that's my goal in the next couple of months, to try to get him on here, because I love discussing world religions. And
see if he'll play the banjo a little bit while he's on. Because he plays the banjo. He actually gives he participates in concerts and things. Like it's like a legitimate thing that he does. Yeah, hidden talent.
So is it bluegrass banjo or like Bela Fleck banjo?
Yeah, I have no idea what that means. I just know he plays the banjo.
I was testing your banjo knowledge. Okay, there's somebody's going to listen to this podcast.
Steve
be like
Martin banjo versus.
Yeah. You need to look up Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. You'll know exactly. It'll blow your mind.
Okay.
Look up.
I'll look it up.
Then you have to, after you listen to it, put a comment in the YouTube channel just so people will think like, why did they even bring this up? Because it will change your life and the whole way you look at banjo. No, it's funny. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, so when you mentioned banjo, I have to talk about it a little bit. So
Great.
Thank you for your question, Alex. Anybody else have a question out there? Well, it is time to wind it down. Anyway, we've been on this for an hour and a half, and I know that you're introverted, so you have to go sleep for 3 hours to recharge your batteries. So, my wife's introverted, so I'm kind of a local expert in introversion and how to wear them out and not think about it. So, um,
True.
so Lindsey, any closing thoughts? Anything that I mean, I obviously would encourage everybody to run on to Amazon right now and buy this book and buy 10 copies and hand it out to your friends and send it to your missionary friends overseas that are dealing with intercultural dialogue and things like that. It really is it's a great book. It's like you said, it's popular level. It's great reminder. And honestly, one of the biggest tasks worldwide that you see with apologetics is how do we get people interested in apologetics? How do we get people to see the value of apologetics ministry? And in Ratio Christi, we firmly believe that you cannot do evangelism without apologetics. It leaves it empty. And you can't do apologetics without evangelism. It'll leave it empty as well. It's
Right.
the whole purpose is to reach out to other people. And this book is a great introductory, like, hey, let's get on board with this. And then, like you said, there's 20 plus pages of endnotes to say, okay, you want to read further? And don't you, it seems like, forgive me for not remembering off the top of my head, but it seems like you even end the chapter, each chapter, with a series of quotes from people that have like more academic level books and things like that. Am I just dreaming that? I
Yeah.
think you did that on purpose, didn't you?
Yeah, so I tried to give recommendations to resources that were a good mix between academic and um, popular level books. Not all of them you're going to agree with uh, necessarily. You'll find that you might have doctrinal issues with some of the people that I mention in the book. That's intentional because as bridge builders, uh, we should be able to acknowledge that we can learn some things from people who might disagree with us on other issues, and so I challenge people to um, read things that maybe aren't written specifically for you or by somebody who is in your subculture, whatever that subculture might be. Challenge yourself to step outside of that for a little bit and learn. It doesn't mean you have to adopt everything that they say as true. It just allows you to think a little bit more deeply about some of the different perspectives brought forth by people who might not be in your camp, I guess
Yeah.
is the easiest way to describe that. Um, but yeah, and then the other thing about this book is that I tried to set it up in a way that people could do a book club or
Yeah.
some sort of study, a small group study with questions at the end of every chapter that you could answer individually if you're just doing the book individually, which is great. But I think that they lend themselves to questions that could be asked in a small group setting as well. And so my hope is that people will want to share it with their pastors or their churches, whoever's in charge of small groups at their churches, and perhaps begin to use that in the fall, because I really think that it could catch on. And my hope is that people will realize that we're already doing apologetics, whether you hold that title or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
As a Christ follower, or even as somebody who doesn't follow Christ, you are defending whatever it is you believe by the actions that you take every day and the words that you speak. And so I hope that people will understand that and want to do Christian apologetics better in their own lives, even if they don't flat out call it Christian apologetics. They just call it engaging with people.
Yeah. Well, I tell people that all the time, man. It's just anytime you're answering a question that somebody has about your faith, you're automatically going to be doing apologetics, whether you want to call it that or not. It should be the natural outflow of the Christian life to be able to say, yeah, this is why I believe this, you know. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't take, like you said, it doesn't take a brain surgeon or professional apologist or MAs and graduate certificates and PhDs.
Right.
One of the most brilliant apologists I know on this earth lives in Kenya. Never finished his bachelor's degree, but he just reads apologetics and teaches all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
been doing it for 20 years. And he's educated himself. I mean, he told me the other day, Lindsey, that Aseka has taught from the abolition of man 7 times. I was like, I don't think I've ever read that more than 3 times. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like, and see, like
Whoa.
that's such a good example then he followed up with
Mm-hmm.
that he has read. He thinks every Christian ought to read Philosophical Foundations of a Christian Worldview yearly. And I'm like, you realize the second, like, not
Oh,
many people get
that's
read the.
a that's a
I don't
hefty
know.
book to read yearly.
Yeah, I need to, when I quote that, I need to just bring it up, like just sync it up out. It's like,
It's
this
a
is still.
massive book.
He's like, that ought to be
It's
yearly
pretty
devotion
though. It's
reading.
got a really pretty cover.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, that
but
would be a big undertaking every year. Wow.
but it just goes to show you that, if my buddy in Nairobi can do that and just read books and get a little bit more educated in this stuff and make it the natural outflow of your life, then that's what it ought to be. We ought to just be able to. It's what I love about your book. It's about just having a fruitful conversation that everybody can walk away still being friends, and yet you've shared the gospel, shared your faith, and so it's really good. Just great Sunday school level. Just let's get apologetics ministry started in our church kind of book, and like this would be a good one to start with. So glad to have it. Glad you're on Team Jesus, Lindsey. It's been a great conversation today.
Thank you. It's been so great being here.
Yeah. Well, God bless you, and we hope to have you back soon. And have you got another book in the works yet, or are you still just trying to decompress from this one?
Nope, still trying to decompress from this one. I don't think there's any decompression happening. It's still kind of like a high kind of situation.
Yeah.
I think I had like 5 interviews scheduled this week. Last week, I think there were 10.
Wow.
And it's great. It's such a blessing to be able to do that. But at the same time, I can't even think about writing another
Yeah.
book right now.
Well, congratulations on the success of it, and like I said, I hope we cross paths soon. And tell Jay I said hello.
Thank you. I sure will. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Well, folks, that concludes today. We thank you for Lindsey Medenwaldt being with us, and thank you guys for sticking with us this long. And if you haven't done it yet, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we're trying to hit that 500 viewer mark, 500 subscriber mark. And in the meantime, continue to follow us for more conversations like this. Next week, we're going to have Mike Lycona on the broadcast talking about his new book about the risen Jesus. And he's, of course, just an expert when it comes to all things resurrection. And he's a good friend of mine, great guy, and you guys are gonna love hearing from him. So, yeah, keep following us, keep loving on us, and like I said, just let's keep the truth conversation going. So God bless you guys, and we'll see you next week about this time. See ya.